This is the Maasai, globally famous for their fierce warrior reputation, but history books hide a dark truth. In the 1880s, an apocalyptic event wiped out 90% of their wealth and half their population. How did they survive? We must go back to the beginning. Today, they are one of the most famous tribes on Earth, recognized globally for their bright red shukas, jumping dances, and fierce warrior reputation. But their true story goes far deeper than a tourist postcard. It is an epic tale of gods, massive migrations, devastating tragedies, and an unbreakable spirit. To understand the Maasai, we must travel back to the very beginning of time, to their creation myth. In the beginning, the universe was dark, and the supreme god, Enkai, lived in the sky. Enkai was not a human, but a divine force of nature. Enkai had two sides: Enkai Narok, the black god, who was kind and brought rain and life, and Enkai Nyoki, the red god, who was angry and brought lightning and drought. One day, Enkai decided to send all the cattle of the world down to earth. To do this, Enkai used a giant, sacred wild fig tree as a ladder from the sky. Waiting at the bottom of the tree was Masinta, the very first Maasai man. Enkai handed Masinta a stick and told him to look after the cattle. Because of this divine gift, the Maasai believed that Enkai gave them a sacred right to all the cattle on earth. To a Maasai, cattle are not just food. They are life, wealth, and a direct link to God. Other people were given different tools, like bows for hunting or hoes for farming, but the Maasai were chosen to be the guardians of the herds. As centuries passed, the descendants of Masinta grew into a powerful nomadic people. Historically, their physical journey began far to the north. Linguistic and historical evidence shows that the Maasai are a Nilotic people, originating in the Nile Valley, north of Lake Turkana, in modern-day South Sudan or Kenya. Around the 15th century, the Maasai began a massive migration southward. They were looking for green pastures and fresh water for their ever-growing herds. They marched through the harsh, rugged terrains of the Great Rift Valley, driving thousands of cattle before them. By the 17th and 18th centuries, the Maasai had reached their destination, the fertile plains of modern-day Kenya and Tanzania. As they arrived, they encountered other tribes, but the Maasai were unstoppable. This era marked the beginning of the Maasai Golden Age. They came to dominate an enormous territory stretching hundreds of miles. They became the undisputed masters of the East African plains. At the heart of this dominance was their unique social structure, specifically the Morans, the young warriors. Maasai boys did not just become men. They had to earn it through intense trials. They were initiated into adulthood through a sacred circumcision ceremony called Unoto. Once initiated, they became Morans. Their job was to protect the village, called a manyata, and defend the cattle from lions and rival tribes. The Morans grew long, braided hair dyed with red ochre and carried heavy shields and razor-sharp spears. They were feared by everyone who crossed their path. Even Arabic and Swahili slave traders, who captured thousands of people across East Africa, actively avoided Maasai territory because the Morans were too dangerous to fight. For generations, the Maasai lived in harmony with their environment, moving their herds with the seasons and living alongside wild animals without hunting them for sport. But the late 19th century brought an era of darkness that almost wiped the Maasai off the face of the earth. The Maasai call this period the Emutai, meaning the wipeout. It began in the 1880s with a terrible drought that dried up the rivers and turned the green plains into dust. Then came a deadly cattle disease called rinderpest, brought by European livestock. It swept through the savanna like wildfire. Within months, nearly 90% of the Maasai's beloved cattle died. The plains were littered with bones. Without cattle, a massive famine began. To make matters worse, a smallpox epidemic broke out among the starving population. It is estimated that during the Emutai, nearly half of the entire Maasai population lost their lives to starvation and disease. Weakened and broken, the Maasai faced a new threat from the outside world: the arrival of European colonial powers. The British Empire arrived in Kenya, eyed the fertile, green pastures of the Rift Valley, and decided they wanted the land for white settlers. Taking advantage of the Maasai's weakened state, the British forced Maasai leaders to sign the Anglo-Maasai Treaties of 1904 and 1911. With the stroke of a pen, the Maasai were stripped of over 60% of their best ancestral lands. They were forcibly evicted and pushed into small, dry, crowded reserves in southern Kenya and northern Tanzania. Later, in the mid-20th century, both colonial and post-independence governments took even more land away from the Maasai to create world-famous wildlife reserves like the Serengeti and the Masai Mara. The irony was bitter. Because the Maasai had protected nature for centuries, their land was beautiful enough to become national parks, but they were kicked out of them. Despite losing their land, their cattle, and half their population, the Maasai did something incredible. They refused to disappear. When other tribes adopted Western clothes, languages, and religions, the Maasai fiercely guarded their traditions. Today, in the 21st century, the Maasai face modern challenges: climate change causing severe droughts, globalization, and the pressure to privatize their communal lands. Yet, they are adapting. Modern Maasai are becoming lawyers, doctors, not witch doctors, and politicians to fight for their land rights using the legal system. Young Morans now use cell phones to track cattle prices, yet they still wear their traditional red shukas with pride. Please like and subscribe to help the channel out.